been some mention of dbt, so I'll piggyback off of that to do my demo. Just one second while I find the right window. Okay, so yeah, this what I have to show you is a culmination of a few weeks of work. It's pretty much all in the back end, and so the front end that you see is fairly minimal. But the goal of what's going on is that we want people to be able to model against, query against dbt in such a way that they can have a development workflow. So when you're sort of in normal mode, you're pulling data from production, but you might be making a change to your dbt models, which results in like new tables or changes to tables. And the way that people do that is by, well, very often the way that they do that is by having separate schemas inside their production warehouse that hold all of their development models. So you can see I have that mimicked here where I have these dbt prod, this dbt prod schema, this dbt prod sales schema, but then there's this dbt buck sales and dbt buck, and those are copies of the prod stuff, but for my development workflow. And if I open that, you can see that I've made it so that there's an extra table in my dev schema, and in prod, there's a different table that doesn't exist in my dev schema. And what we're working on is, well, I'll just show you. So there's this new syntax in the model that you can specify what your target schema is for the what you would call a production model. And by that existing, we now create this Omni dbt and Omni dbt sales schemas, which are virtual schemas. They're similar to dynamic schemas that Conrad built. It's built all on top of the dynamic schema stuff. So these are schemas that will, because you're pointing to prod here, these are all going to point to prod. So if you now run queries against this Omni dbt schema, any of these views inside of it, they're going to be pulling from the production version. And that way you can like build references on top of this Omni dbt schema, and Omni dbt is never going to change. So now if I make a branch, and I can change this now to dbt buck, you'll see that this schema stays the same. That prod specific table just dropped out, and now we have a dev one. These other ones that are the same between dev and prod are unchanged. And so we can query against this stuff. And you can see that this query on this branch is pulling from dev. I have like modified the data so that dbt dev is in the data. If I exit the branch and run the query again, now it's pulling from prod. So that's the sort of the full end-to-end what's going on there. Hopefully all that made sense. There's a lot of like dbt specific stuff, but if it didn't make sense to anybody, let me know.
Is the vision then that people would build their data model on essentially the Omni dbt schema rather than the individual schemas themselves?
Yes.
Okay.
And that way, everything will just seamlessly point to pull from the underlying dev tables once they've switched to a branch, and they can run content validation. That's all going to like check that things work. And then once they promote, the idea is that it's broken right now, my branch, but if I were to promote this, it would not promote this value, and it would retain the branch in your non-branch model.
Makes sense. So that's one for the field team to think about as we like recommend architectures for this stuff.
For what it's worth, just on that mention, Megan and I talked to some folks at Quizlet yesterday who are a pretty dbt heavy shop, the data engineering team there, and we were mentioning that Buck was actually working on this. I didn't expect to see it today, which is awesome, but they were pretty stoked on the idea of this. This sounded like something they would definitely have a heavy use case for.
Buck, quick question. What, again, you may have done this at the beginning, but what caused the Omni dbt like virtual schema to show up? Is it when you add this parameter into the model that it then creates that, or what triggers this?
Yeah, adding this in will trigger it to be created. And it's going to search. So yeah, there's one important thing to point out there, which is if you go into a branch and you add a schema that's not a dbt schema like dbt buck that hasn't been used before, you will also have to run a refresh schema from within this branch, which will like run dbt syncing process for this branch. So another detail you might see is if I go into one of these things that has some metadata being pulled in, you get dbt info for this development schema now. And it will also exist for the prod one. You can see that the target schema is dbt prod. And so you got information for both dev and prod stuff in here. But yeah, to your original question, the presence of this is what triggers these to be created. And my thought is that we may want to, right now you have to configure the target schema in your connection settings. We may want to just maybe remove it, only have it in the model, or maybe have changes to the connection settings automatically update this. You know, it's kind of duplicated data now, so how exactly those play together is TBD.
And then is
Is
there
there
a
a
way,
reason? Oh, so go ahead.
I was just gonna ask real quick, is there a way, like, once you do have this now, the Omni dbt virtual, to like, I guess maybe you want this, maybe you don't, to like hide the underlying dbt ones to clear up the
That's exactly what I was gonna get to, Ariel, is that most likely if you're utilizing this functionality, you'll want to do something like ignored schemas, dbt underscore star or something like that, and that will then make it so that you don't accidentally model against kind of the source schemas, but you're modeling against the Omni schema.
Buck, related to the duplicative schema parameter, is there a reason why it has to live in the model at all? Could it just live on the connection? I just noted that I know you had to jump through some hoops to not like, allow it to be merged and so forth, which maybe suggests to me that it's a little bit of an awkward thing to have in the model.
Yeah, I mean, so there's two things there. One is there is a discussion that Conrad brought up that I'm going to revisit once I got the basic functionality down around like, do you want to sometimes merge this or give the user control to merge it? If you were, that use case, I guess, is a separate discussion. Ultimately, the reason for putting it in the model was a bit of a technical difficulty in that where we're doing the model merging, we don't have access to outside bits of information. The easiest thing to do is if there's data that's attached to the model itself. It could be like a separate bit of data that's on the model record in the database that maybe is not part of what you see in edit, but actually just having it part of the model data structure made it so that we don't have to refactor like a huge amount of the back end.